Welcome to Quiet Universe, where we journey into the unexplored depths of the mind. Today, we're diving into the fascinating, often unsettling world of abnormal psychology, a field that asks questions most of us wouldn't dare to. We're about to unravel what it means to be abnormal, a term that's both captivating and slippery, as well as why our brains can sometimes turn against us in ways that leave even science scratching its head. Together, we'll touch on the mind-body connection that makes emotions resonate physically within us, the invisible scars of trauma, and even the eerie phenomenon of false memories that make us wonder, can we really trust our own minds? We'll go into the mysteries that lie behind disorders resistant to any treatment, explore the concept of dissociative identity disorder, and learn why some people hesitate to heal even when they're desperate for relief. So, get comfortable, let your mind wander, and let's begin our journey into the strange, mind-bending landscape of abnormal psychology. Abnormal psychology is a field within psychology focused on the study of unusual patterns of behavior, thought, and emotion, often associated with mental disorders. This area of psychology seeks to understand why certain behaviors deviate from what's generally considered typical or normal, and how these behaviors affect individuals' lives. Researchers and clinicians working in abnormal psychology aim to better understand the complexities of mental health issues, which can range from anxiety and mood disorders to psychotic disorders and personality disorders. Historically, the study of abnormal psychology has gone through significant changes. Early views on mental illness often involved supernatural explanations, such as possession or punishment for moral failings. During the Middle Ages, individuals exhibiting unusual behaviors were sometimes labeled as witches or subjected to exorcisms. Over time, however, these explanations were replaced by a medical perspective that saw mental illness as a condition requiring treatment rather than punishment or social exclusion. In the 18th and 19th centuries, figures like Philippe Pinel and Dorothea Dix advocated for humane treatment of individuals with mental disorders, leading to a movement toward more compassionate approaches to mental health care. Sigmund Freud's work in psychoanalysis also marked a major development in abnormal psychology, as it introduced the idea that unconscious conflicts could drive abnormal behaviors. Freud's theories opened the door to psychodynamic approaches in treating mental illness, which dominated the field for much of the early 20th century. Today, abnormal psychology is an interdisciplinary field drawing on research from neuroscience, genetics, cognitive science, and social psychology. Mental disorders are viewed through multiple lenses, with a biopsychosocial approach that considers the interactions among biological, psychological, and social factors. Diagnostic frameworks, like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, by the American Psychiatric Association, are widely used by clinicians to diagnose and treat mental health conditions. The DSM and similar systems categorize mental health disorders based on clusters of symptoms, allowing clinicians to apply standardized criteria to diagnose conditions such as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and anxiety disorders. Theories and treatment approaches in abnormal psychology continue to evolve. The cognitive behavioral approach, which focuses on how thoughts influence emotions and behaviors, has become particularly influential. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for instance, has been shown to be highly effective for conditions such as depression and anxiety. Meanwhile, advances in neuroimaging have allowed researchers to explore how structural and functional abnormalities in the brain correlate with various mental health issues. Overall, abnormal psychology seeks not only to understand the origins and manifestations of mental health disorders, but also to find effective treatments to improve quality of life for those affected. Defining what truly counts as abnormal behavior can feel like trying to fix a line that keeps moving. People's understanding of what's normal or acceptable behavior shifts over time and across cultures, often based on the rules society sets or what the majority does. But this idea of normal is never just a clear checklist. It's a blend of shared beliefs, values, and expectations. Abnormality often brings to mind extremes: screaming in a quiet place, withdrawing completely from loved ones, or talking to someone no one else can see. Yet, as soon as you scratch the surface, you realize how fragile and conditional these definitions are. What looks unusual or even disturbing in one setting might be ordinary or even admirable in another. At the heart of it, people are complex and diverse. Human behavior sits on a spectrum, affected by everything from personality and upbringing to trauma and biology. When we try to label something as abnormal, we're often using our own backgrounds as a benchmark. A behavior may not seem strange to a person who's lived a certain experience, but could be jarring to someone who hasn't. Think of someone who's experienced war, loss, or an intense personal challenge. They may react to certain situations in ways that others see as intense or inappropriate. Yet, for them, those reactions are a logical result of what they've endured. Psychologists and mental health professionals try to define abnormal behavior using standards that attempt to be objective. Patterns of thoughts, feelings, or actions that cause distress, impair daily functioning, or defy what a culture or community expects. But even these measures aren't foolproof. Distress and impairment, for example, can show up in people who are navigating normal responses to hardship, not necessarily in a person struggling with a mental illness. The context is everything. Someone grieving, going through a major transition, or dealing with a life-altering diagnosis might display unusual behaviors, but their response is far from abnormal in a clinical sense. It's human. Imagine two people reacting differently to the same event. One might appear composed, while the other breaks down completely. Neither is necessarily abnormal. They're just responding differently based on their unique set of experiences and coping mechanisms. To call one response abnormal and the other normal might say more about the observer's expectations than the individuals being observed. Often, it's only when a behavior starts causing harm or isolation, either for the person or for those around them, that it's considered a problem needing intervention. The concept of abnormality ultimately underscores how nuanced human behavior is, how diverse individual responses can be, and how subjective our understanding of normal really is. Rather than simply labeling certain actions as abnormal, the real challenge lies in understanding why people do what they do and giving room for the countless shades of human experience. The placebo effect in mental health treatments is a fascinating window into the power of belief and the mind's capacity to shape its own healing. When someone takes a placebo, a substance or treatment that has no direct physiological effect, their symptoms can still improve simply because they believe they're receiving genuine care. It's not about tricking someone, but rather harnessing the brain's innate ability to respond to expectation and hope. In mental health, where symptoms are often complex, overlapping, and deeply tied to personal beliefs and perceptions, the placebo effect can be particularly profound. Imagine someone struggling with anxiety who takes what they believe is a powerful anti-anxiety medication. They may begin to feel calmer, more at ease, and more in control, not because of any chemical change, but because their brain has activated its own resources to make them feel better. The mind starts to release its own mix of neurotransmitters, like dopamine or serotonin, which can mimic the effects of real medications. This effect doesn't mean that the person's symptoms were all in their head, or that they didn't genuinely need help. Instead, it highlights how mental health is not just about what's wrong with the brain or body. It's also deeply connected to what we believe, what we hope for, and how we interpret our experiences. In some cases, people can see real, lasting improvements through placebo responses in ways that are difficult to explain purely by biology. For instance, someone with depression might find that a placebo not only lifts their mood temporarily, but actually helps them feel empowered to make meaningful changes in their lives. The faith they placed in the treatment might give them a renewed sense of agency, allowing them to take steps toward things they'd given up on or felt too discouraged to pursue. For those who feel isolated in their struggles, believing that they are receiving support, whether through medication, therapy, or community, can itself be healing. Placebo treatments often show just how deeply a sense of care and support influences well-being. Of course, the placebo effect isn't a cure-all, and it doesn't replace the need for genuine mental health care, especially for severe cases. But it does remind us of the complexity of mental health treatment and the critical role of human connection, trust, and expectation in the healing process. People are not machines simply in need of repair. They're impacted by their beliefs, relationships, and environment, and often by small, intangible moments of reassurance and optimism. The placebo effect taps into these dimensions, showing us that the mind's own hope and resilience can sometimes be as powerful as any prescribed treatment. The mind-body connection in psychosomatic disorders is a powerful reminder of how deeply intertwined our thoughts, emotions, and physical health truly are. When someone experiences a psychosomatic disorder, it means they're dealing with real physical symptoms that arise from psychological stress or unresolved emotions, rather than a direct physical cause. This doesn't make their pain or discomfort any less real. The body is responding in a tangible way to what the mind is experiencing, manifesting stress, worry, or trauma through symptoms like chronic pain, fatigue, or even stomach issues. It's as if the mind, unable to bear or process a particular feeling, recruits the body to help carry the weight of it. For someone living with a psychosomatic disorder, everyday stress or deeply buried emotions can feel like a physical burden they can't quite shake off. Maybe they've been holding on to unresolved grief, disappointment, or anxiety, and gradually, these feelings start to surface in unexpected ways. Headaches, muscle tension, or digestive issues might appear, not because of any underlying physical condition, but as expressions of the mind's struggle. It's a complex cycle. Stress causes physical symptoms. The symptoms create more stress, and round it goes, often without the person even being fully aware of the connection. This connection between mind and body can be both a source of vulnerability and a pathway to healing. While psychosomatic symptoms can be frustrating and even debilitating, recognizing their origins can be incredibly empowering. When people start to understand that their physical symptoms might be rooted in stress or emotional pain, it gives them a new way to approach their health. Therapy, mindfulness practices, and stress management techniques can become as important as any physical treatment, allowing them to care for their emotional well-being and, in turn, lessen their physical symptoms. Far from making psychosomatic disorders all in the head, the mind-body connection shows us just how deeply personal and individualized health can be. The body often tells stories that the mind has yet to fully process, and each symptom can offer clues about what someone may be holding back or struggling with emotionally. Understanding this connection doesn't just offer a different treatment path. It offers a way of seeing health as something broader and more interconnected, where mental and physical well-being influence and shape one another in ways that are deeply human. Unconscious motives and behaviors are like hidden currents that shape our choices, feelings, and actions, often without us even realizing it. We may go through our days making decisions and reacting to situations as if we're fully aware of our reasons, but beneath the surface, there can be layers of motives and desires we haven't yet brought to light. These unconscious forces can guide everything from the way we handle relationships to the habits we build, influencing us in ways we can't always explain. Imagine finding yourself inexplicably irritated with a friend or hesitating at a promising opportunity. Sometimes, there's no clear reason, and yet the feeling is undeniable. These reactions often come from past experiences, fears, or unmet needs we've pushed out of our awareness, yet they continue to echo in our current lives. Much of what drives us unconsciously can be traced back to our early experiences and relationships, which shape the way we see the world and ourselves, often without us fully realizing it. For instance, a person who grew up feeling they had to constantly prove themselves might, as an adult, unconsciously seek approval in their career or relationships, pushing themselves hard but without understanding why they feel so compelled to achieve. They may think they're simply ambitious, but beneath that drive could be an unmet need for validation and belonging that they've been carrying for years. And because this need is unconscious, it influences them subtly, steering their choices without them ever directly confronting or understanding it. Unconscious motives can also make us act in ways that contradict what we consciously want. Someone may say they're ready for a close relationship, yet find themselves repeatedly drawn to partners who are emotionally unavailable. Consciously, they may believe they want intimacy, but unconsciously, there could be a fear of vulnerability or rejection, leading them to choose situations where closeness is just out of reach. In this way, unconscious motives create a complex dance between what we say we want and what our deeper, unacknowledged fears and desires actually push us toward. Recognizing the influence of unconscious motives isn't about blaming ourselves or endlessly analyzing every decision, but rather about understanding that we are all shaped by experiences and feelings that don't always make it to the surface. It's a reminder that becoming more aware of these hidden forces can help us break patterns, make decisions that align more closely with our true needs, and ultimately give us more control over the direction of our lives. In learning to recognize and understand these unseen motives, we gain a new level of self-awareness, allowing us to act with more freedom, intention, and authenticity. Trauma has a profound impact on the brain, altering both its structure and function in ways that can shape a person's perception, reactions, and emotions long after the traumatic event itself. When someone experiences trauma, especially if it's prolonged or happens in childhood, the brain shifts into survival mode, adapting to help the person cope with what feels like a constant threat. Key areas of the brain, such as the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex, each play distinct roles in processing emotions, memories, and executive functions, and trauma affects them all in different ways, creating lasting changes in how a person experiences the world. The amygdala, often called the brain's alarm system, becomes hyperactive in people who've endured trauma. It reacts intensely to threats, real or perceived, making a person more vigilant and reactive. Even small triggers, a sound, a smell, a familiar setting, can make the amygdala sound the alarm, causing someone to feel on edge or in danger, even if they're safe. This heightened sensitivity is part of the brain's way of protecting itself, but it can lead to a state of chronic anxiety or hypervigilance, where the person's nervous system is constantly on high alert. Trauma also disrupts the function of the hippocampus, which is critical for forming and retrieving memories. In people who have experienced trauma, the hippocampus can shrink, which complicates how they remember the event. Memories of trauma may not be stored in a straightforward, chronological way, but as fragmented or highly charged sensory pieces that feel as if they're happening in the present. This distortion can make traumatic memories more intrusive and overwhelming, leading to flashbacks or intense emotional responses that seem to come out of nowhere. For some, it's difficult to differentiate between a memory and the current moment, as the brain keeps pulling them back to the original traumatic experience. The prefrontal cortex, which helps with decision-making, impulse control, and emotional regulation, also takes a hit. Under the influence of trauma, this area can struggle to function properly, making it hard for someone to think logically, manage their impulses, or calm themselves down when they're upset. It can feel like the rational part of their brain has been partially hijacked by fear and survival instincts. This change can explain why people with a history of trauma might find themselves reacting more intensely, or even impulsively, in situations that others would find manageable. The brain is prioritizing survival over careful analysis, even when that heightened response isn't needed. Together, these changes create a brain that is wired for survival, constantly searching for threats and preparing for danger. While these adaptations can be protective in genuinely dangerous situations, they often create challenges in everyday life, making it difficult for someone to fully engage, relax, or trust. But it's also important to remember that the brain has remarkable plasticity and can heal over time. Therapy, support, and practices that promote calm and safety can help rewire these pathways, allowing the brain to slowly shift out of survival mode and reconnect with a sense of peace and resilience. Understanding how trauma impacts the brain can bring compassion and insight, both for those who live with its effects and for those who support them, showing that these changes are not a matter of willpower but of the brain's incredible, if sometimes overwhelming, response to hardship. Understanding the intricate balance between genetics and environment in shaping mental health is like tracing the subtle lines that shape our identities. For many, the impact of genetics feels like a deep-rooted presence, an unchangeable set of possibilities carried from family, quietly influencing the tendencies within. Some individuals may have relatives who have faced depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder, for instance, and studies suggest that having these conditions in the family can slightly raise one's own likelihood of encountering similar struggles. This genetic influence is not, however, a strict determinant. It's more like an undercurrent, a starting point that doesn't necessarily decide one's entire journey. But the environment plays a powerful, sometimes surprising role as well, sculpting mental health in ways that are tangible and dynamic. Consider a person growing up in a warm, supportive family that values communication, where they learn early on that it's okay to share worries, where they feel safe and heard. This nurturing environment often builds resilience, even if they're predisposed to mental health challenges. Conversely, when someone is raised in a chaotic, unstable, or even abusive setting, they may become more vulnerable to mental health difficulties, regardless of their genetic makeup. Life circumstances, stress at work, strained relationships, financial insecurities, can impact mental health with a weight and immediacy that feels far more palpable than the abstract pull of genetics. Then there are experiences that leave an imprint on everyone, even those with no family history of mental health issues. A sudden loss, a traumatic event, a prolonged illness. These moments rewrite parts of us, sometimes awakening dormant susceptibilities or creating entirely new mental health challenges. For some, these shifts are temporary, while others may find themselves in a continuous process of healing. The more scientists delve into this field, the more they realize that genes may hold a silent potential for certain traits or vulnerabilities, but the environment acts as a trigger, a guide, sometimes even a counterbalance. For those grappling with mental health issues, Knowing this interaction can be empowering, offering a reminder that even if there's a genetic hand dealt, it isn't a sentence. Therapy, supportive relationships, meaningful routines, and healthy lifestyle choices have a real impact, showing that environmental choices can foster growth, mitigate difficulties, or even help transcend certain genetic predispositions. Ultimately, mental health is born out of the dance between these two forces, a continuous conversation between who we are innately and what we are shaped to be. The beauty in this understanding lies in its nuance. It's a mosaic of influence rather than a rigid path, giving each person a unique way to navigate the complexities of mental health. Memory is often thought of as a faithful record of the past, but in reality, it's a lot more malleable and vulnerable to distortion than we'd like to believe. Our brains work in curious ways, not recording exact details like a camera, but instead piecing together fragments of information to create an impression of what happened. This can lead to distortions, where memories become slightly altered versions of reality. Sometimes, our minds fill in the gaps without our even realizing it, leading us to believe we remember events with clarity and certainty, when in fact, we're reconstructing them based on assumptions, emotions, and context. These distortions can even go as far as to create entirely false memories, vivid yet completely fabricated recollections of things that never occurred. It's both fascinating and unsettling to realize that people can form memories of events, big or small, that didn't actually happen. This phenomenon can come into play through suggestibility, where questions or external influences subtly guide us to remember something inaccurately. Imagine a friend recounting a past incident, describing it in detail and insisting you were there with them. You may start to visualize the scene, remember fragments that align with their story, and eventually believe you truly experienced it, even if you weren't there at all. This isn't a flaw or failure in our minds. It's just how our memories work, fluid and susceptible to the influence of context, emotion, and even those around us. Our emotional state plays a huge role in shaping how we remember, too. Strong feelings like fear, sadness, or joy can color a memory, exaggerating certain details while blurring others, often reinforcing specific aspects of an experience. In moments of trauma or high stress, for instance, the mind can distort memories to either shield itself from distressing details or, paradoxically, sharpen certain moments to an extreme degree. This isn't just a quirk, it's a survival mechanism, a way our minds help us process or, in some cases, protect us from what we can't handle. The flexibility of memory can be a mixed blessing. On one hand, it means that our recollections can change to fit our evolving sense of self or how we view relationships over time. But on the other, it means our memories are vulnerable to outside suggestions or emotional biases, making it possible to misremember or even invent past events. People often end up in situations where they're convinced they remember something clearly, yet others recall it differently. It can be disorienting and can lead to misunderstandings or conflict, especially when those involved have different, equally strong recollections. Understanding that memory isn't a precise or infallible archive, but rather a dynamic process shaped by various factors can be surprisingly freeing. It helps us realize that some conflicts about the past may not be about right or wrong, but rather about our own distinct interpretations. Embracing this can foster compassion for ourselves and others, reminding us that the stories we carry are as complex and changing as we are. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is one of the most puzzling and misunderstood conditions in mental health, often leaving people unsure of what to believe or how to feel about it. It is a disorder in which a person experiences multiple distinct identities or alters within a single mind, each with its own sense of self, memories, and even unique traits. For those with DID, it can feel as though they are a complex collection of selves, each one surfacing at different times, often unaware of the other's experiences. This fragmented sense of identity can be disorienting and isolating, both for the person living with it and for the people around them, who may struggle to understand what it's like to navigate the world with multiple coexisting identities. The origins of DID are generally tied to severe trauma, often in early childhood. When a young mind is repeatedly overwhelmed by traumatic events, dissociation can become a coping mechanism, a way to mentally escape unbearable situations. For some, this survival tactic becomes so entrenched that their identity divides, creating distinct selves to handle different situations or emotional burdens. These identities may emerge to protect the core self from trauma, each one taking on a role, like a guardian or a caretaker. while the person's true sense of self retreats into a place of safety. This adaptive response allows the mind to manage trauma in ways that may feel incomprehensible from the outside but are deeply protective at their core. Living with DID often means facing gaps in memory, lost time, and a confusing sense of self. For people with this disorder, it can be unsettling to wake up to find they've missed hours, days, or even weeks, with no recollection of what their other identities were doing in that time. These experiences can lead to profound feelings of disorientation and can impact relationships, daily life, and a sense of continuity. Trying to maintain a stable life with DID is a unique challenge, as each identity may have different desires, dislikes, and ways of perceiving the world. Imagine living with a mind that houses multiple people, each one with its own version of normal. Therapy for DID is often a long and challenging journey, focusing not on erasing these identities, but on understanding and integrating them. It requires immense patience and courage, both from those with DID and their therapists, as they work together to unravel painful memories, confront fears, and build a more cohesive sense of self. Therapists try to help these identities communicate with each other, to lessen the sense of fragmentation and improve awareness between them. It's a delicate balance, respecting the protective role that each identity has played while encouraging a path toward wholeness. There's also a lot of skepticism and misunderstanding surrounding DID, which can be incredibly isolating for those who live with it. It's not uncommon for people to doubt the validity of the disorder or to assume it's a product of overactive imagination or even manipulation, largely because DID challenges what we think we know about identity and consciousness. However, for those who experience it, the disorder is real and can feel like a constant, exhausting process of self-reconciliation. Understanding DID means acknowledging that the mind is capable of extraordinary, sometimes bewildering adaptations, and that, for those with DID, their identities are not fragments to be dismissed but parts of a survival story, a testament to their resilience. Some mental health disorders seem stubbornly resistant to treatment, defying even the most advanced therapies and medicines. For individuals living with these conditions, it can be deeply frustrating and painful, leaving them feeling trapped within their own minds. A major reason for this resistance lies in the complex nature of these disorders. Mental health issues often involve multiple layers of biology, psychology, and environment. Conditions like treatment-resistant depression, certain forms of schizophrenia, or severe obsessive-compulsive disorder may involve genetic factors that are particularly challenging to address with current treatments, as well as deep-rooted changes in brain chemistry that make typical medications less effective. For example, some people with depression might find that their brain does not respond to antidepressants the way others do, possibly due to subtle variations in their brain's receptors or in the way their body metabolizes medication. Beyond biology, mental health treatments are also influenced by personal history, trauma, and individual psychological responses, which can complicate recovery. Someone who has endured prolonged trauma, for example, may carry layers of emotional scarring that make traditional therapies less effective because their mind has adapted in ways that standard treatments aren't designed to address. Trauma can alter a person's entire framework of self-protection, making them resistant to the vulnerability required in therapy. As a result, treatments that may work well for others don't seem to fit or feel accessible. People with conditions like PTSD or borderline personality disorder may need highly specialized, trauma-focused treatments, which aren't always available or effective for everyone. Lifestyle, social support, and even socioeconomic factors play roles too. For instance, those without a strong support system or with high stress from work, relationships, or finances may find it nearly impossible to make the necessary lifestyle changes that could help their treatment succeed. Medication or therapy might provide some relief, but without stability in their lives, the effects often don't last. Poverty, social isolation, and lack of access to consistent health care all contribute to treatment resistance, as these barriers make it hard for people to maintain the consistency that many mental health treatments require. Even when every effort is made, some disorders remain mysterious and stubbornly resistant to all known treatments. This resistance can feel deeply discouraging, making individuals question if they'll ever experience relief. For many, it becomes a continual process of searching for new options, exploring different medications, types of therapy, or holistic approaches, all while managing the ups and downs of a condition that remains largely unmoved. Yet, for some, this search does yield new forms of hope, from experimental treatments like ketamine therapy to newer brain stimulation technologies. These options don't always bring immediate or total relief, but they represent a movement toward better understanding and addressing what makes some disorders so resistant. Ultimately, when it comes to mental health, treatment is rarely simple, and progress can feel elusive. But with time and continued research, there is always a chance for breakthroughs, ones that might finally bring relief to those who've long felt forgotten by traditional treatment methods. Understanding that treatment resistance is not a sign of failure, but rather a reflection of the complexity of mental health can be empowering. It emphasizes the resilience of those who live with these challenges, who keep pushing forward even when the way to wellness seems hidden. Studying mental illness brings profound ethical challenges, as researchers are dealing not only with science, but with people's minds, emotions, and very identities. Mental illness affects some of the most vulnerable aspects of human life, which means that the responsibility to protect and respect the dignity of those who participate in studies is immense. Participants often enter research with the hope of finding relief or insight into their struggles, and researchers want to honor that trust, making sure that their involvement is both meaningful and safe. But it's not always a simple balance. For instance, some studies may involve testing new medications or therapies that could cause side effects or even worsen symptoms, and finding the line between scientific necessity and personal risk is incredibly challenging. Informed consent, a fundamental part of ethical research, can be complicated by the very nature of mental illness. For those experiencing conditions like schizophrenia, severe depression, or bipolar disorder, understanding and agreeing to complex research terms might not always be straightforward. Researchers have to ensure that participants fully grasp what the study entails, that they're aware of any risks, and that they truly have the ability to make an informed choice. This can feel daunting because, on one hand, researchers want to include those who might benefit most from the study's findings, but on the other, they have to be certain that participants are in a stable enough place to consent without coercion or misunderstanding. Additionally, mental health research often involves highly personal and sometimes distressing subject matter. Asking people to revisit traumatic memories or delve into painful thoughts can be necessary for understanding certain mental health conditions, yet it can also risk causing psychological harm. Researchers work to create supportive environments and provide follow-up care, but the reality is that these conversations sometimes bring up more pain than relief, leaving researchers with the ethical burden of balancing the value of their findings with the potential impact on participants' well-being. Privacy and confidentiality are further layers of ethical complexity. Mental health research can require intimate details of participants' lives, and handling such sensitive information with care is crucial. Any breach of privacy, intentional or accidental, could cause serious harm. Not just embarrassment, but real-life consequences in participants' personal and professional lives. Stigmas around mental illness still exist, and people who participate in these studies are often putting their trust in researchers to protect their identities and stories. Researchers must take meticulous steps to safeguard data, knowing that even a small mistake could have profound effects on a participant's life. Finally, mental health research often faces ethical questions about intervention. In some studies, researchers may have to stand by and observe, even when participants are struggling, in order to gather accurate information on symptoms and responses. This can create a dilemma, as researchers may feel the urge to intervene or help, yet doing so could alter the results and compromise the study's findings. Balancing the commitment to ethical care with the demands of scientific rigor is a constant challenge, making mental health research a field that requires not only scientific expertise, but also empathy, integrity, and moral courage. These ethical challenges underscore the fact that mental health research is not just about understanding illness, but about understanding people, with all their vulnerabilities and resilience. The responsibility to ensure that research is conducted with compassion and respect is as essential as the scientific quest itself, because, ultimately, the goal is not only to deepen our knowledge, but to contribute positively to the lives of those affected by mental illness. Culture-bound syndromes are intriguing phenomena in psychiatry and anthropology, representing unique ways that societies interpret and express distress, often deeply rooted in the social, cultural, and historical fabric of a particular community. In essence, they're patterns of behavior, beliefs, or symptoms that may seem alien or unusual to outsiders, but hold significant meaning and impact within the culture where they originate. Imagine a culture where mental, physical, and spiritual health are inseparable, with each deeply woven into the beliefs, folklore, and traditions of that society. In these cultures, distress might not simply manifest as anxiety or depression, but but as something specific to their worldview, reflecting concerns, fears, or moral values that hold weight in their community. Take ataque de nervios, for example, a syndrome observed primarily in Latin American cultures. Here, someone experiencing intense emotional distress might undergo sudden bouts of crying, shaking, and shouting, often in reaction to situations of extreme stress or personal loss. These episodes make sense within the context of a culture where family relationships, emotional expression, and respect are central. Experiencing an attack of the nerves reflects not just a reaction to stress, but also a way to seek communal understanding and empathy, often allowing for healing through shared emotional response. Family members may not view these episodes as bizarre or alarming, but as expressions of real pain. In a setting like this, showing strong emotional reactions might even signify sincerity, a kind of outpouring that validates the depth of the person's connection to those around them. In contrast, Koro is found mostly in parts of Southeast Asia, particularly among men who believe their genitals are retracting into their bodies. This fear may seem perplexing, yet it's heavily influenced by local beliefs about the balance between masculine and feminine energies, bodily harmony, and the dangers associated with supernatural forces. For the men who experience this, it's not just a private terror but a communal one, often triggering public displays of distress, family gatherings, and even ceremonies to restore balance or protect the individual from perceived dangers. Historically, Koro may be rooted in societal values placed on masculinity, virility, and lineage, reflecting anxieties about identity and one's role in society. Another example, Dat syndrome in South Asia, involves feelings of fatigue, weakness, and anxiety related to the loss of semen, believed to drain life energy. It's more than a physical condition. It's entwined with the cultural perception that semen is a vital fluid, precious and finite, essential to a man's strength and masculinity. Often young men in regions where DAD is common are deeply influenced by the cultural teachings around sexuality, many of which carry taboos, myths, and a strong emphasis on preserving sexual energy. For someone experiencing this syndrome, the fear of semen loss becomes an expression of deeper societal expectations and pressures, where one's strength and social worth are perceived as bound to their physical constitution. In contrast, the concept of susto, prevalent in some Latin American regions, is believed to occur when the soul temporarily leaves the body after a frightening or shocking experience, causing symptoms such as anxiety, restlessness, and sleep disturbances. To an outsider, this might sound like PTSD, but to someone within this culture, susto is a deeply spiritual affliction. The symptoms reflect a fractured connection between the body and soul, and so recovery often involves not only rest but spiritual rituals or family involvement to call back the soul. It highlights how different cultures interpret psychological distress not merely as a personal ailment, but as a rupture in one's spiritual relationship with the world. Many of these syndromes have evolved as reflections of cultural fears, values, and understandings of the human body and mind. In some cases, the intense social meaning of these syndromes can even lead to shared expressions of distress, where individuals are not only expressing their pain but reaffirming communal values. These syndromes demonstrate the complex relationship between individual experience and the collective cultural lens through which distress is understood and treated, where healing is often as much about restoring social and spiritual balance as it is about relieving symptoms. Psychotic episodes can be profoundly disorienting and challenging, not just for those experiencing them, but also for those close to them. Imagine the mind, usually steady and rooted in familiar routines and logic, slipping into a space where perceptions, thoughts, and even one's sense of self become fragmented and unpredictable. For someone in the grip of psychosis, reality doesn't follow familiar rules. What seems real and concrete to others might feel fluid or even hostile. Sounds might distort into accusations or threats, and everyday objects can appear imbued with hidden meanings. A person may find themselves convinced of realities that don't align with the world as others see it, believing, for instance, that they're under surveillance, that strangers harbor hostile intent, or that they have extraordinary powers or missions to fulfill. The nature of psychosis is unpredictable. Unlike other conditions that might have a more gradual buildup or clear physical symptoms, psychotic episodes can appear with little warning, sometimes triggered by stress, sleep disturbances, or even without any obvious catalyst. For family members and friends, this can be a sudden and terrifying change, watching someone they love spiral into thoughts and behaviors that seem wholly uncharacteristic. Psychotic episodes often start subtly. A quiet withdrawal, odd comments, a decline in self-care. But then, suddenly, reality may feel to the person as though it's spinning off its axis. These delusions and hallucinations might seem at odds with the person's usual personality, and their fears and emotions often feel all too real to them, regardless of how bizarre or incomprehensible they may seem to outsiders. Another complex layer of psychosis is that it's not always a constant experience. Some people may have moments of lucidity between episodes, a brief return to a more familiar state of mind, only for the psychotic symptoms to resurge unpredictably. This ebb and flow can be painful for everyone involved, as just when things seem to be improving, another episode might set in. Each episode is unique, as different combinations of delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized thoughts shift and change in intensity. This inconsistency often adds to the fear and stigma around psychosis, making it feel like a frightening unknown rather than a treatable condition. The person may remember parts of the episode afterward, or they might feel as though they were in a dream, unsure which parts were real. Medication and therapy can help manage psychotic episodes, but the path to stability is often neither quick nor straightforward. Adjusting medications, building coping strategies, and learning to live with or anticipate episodes take time and patience. For many, managing psychosis becomes a lifelong journey, a careful balance of mental health practices, support systems, and sometimes medication. It's a path where stability can be hard-won, and where every period of clarity can feel like a victory. And yet, despite the frightening nature of these experiences, people who live with psychosis can and do find ways to lead fulfilling lives, even in the face of its unpredictable nature. Mental health stigma has shifted dramatically across cultures and throughout history, reflecting society's evolving understanding of the mind, illness, and morality. In ancient times, mental health issues were often seen through a supernatural lens. Many cultures believed that strange behaviors, unusual thoughts, or emotional disturbances were signs of possession, curses, or punishment by gods. Ancient Greek and Roman societies, however, began to consider mental health as an aspect of physical and emotional health, with philosophers like Hippocrates advocating for the idea that mental illness stemmed from imbalances in the body. This was a step forward, yet these early theories were often limited and left plenty of room for misunderstanding and prejudice. Those affected were still kept at the fringes of society or, at best, met with pity and a sense of detachment. Over time, these early attitudes transformed but did not entirely lose their stigma. The Middle Ages brought a renewed wave of fear and superstition, with mental illness once again seen as something dark or dangerous. Many people believed those affected were in league with dark forces, and treatments often took the form of exorcisms or punishments intended to drive out perceived evil influences. Those suffering from mental illness were hidden away or cast out, leading to a lasting impression of mental health issues as something shameful. For many centuries, society's perception of mental health was a blend of fear, confusion, and rejection, leading to institutions like asylums that often operated more like prisons than places of care. In more recent centuries, with the rise of psychology and psychiatry, mental health began to be seen as a legitimate medical field. The Victorian era brought both advances and setbacks. While some early attempts at humane treatment were made, patients in mental health facilities often faced cruel treatment and isolation, and stigma remained high. By the 20th century, the world saw significant changes, as mental illness began to be understood in terms of diagnoses, conditions, and treatments. However, this scientific understanding did not erase the stigma. For many cultures, a lingering association with shame, failure, or weakness remained attached to mental health issues. In Western societies, mental health began to carry social stigma as a sign of emotional fragility or inadequacy, while in many Eastern cultures, particularly in collectivist societies, mental illness was viewed as something that brought shame not only to the individual but also to the family. A person's struggles were seen as something to be concealed, adding pressure to manage symptoms in silence rather than seeking help. Today, mental health stigma varies widely depending on culture, economic background, and exposure to mental health education. In some places, mental health is openly discussed and treatment is encouraged. However, in other parts of the world, especially where resources are limited, mental illness may still be treated as a taboo subject, something to hide or deny. In some societies, people might still use traditional healers, not because they lack access to medical care, but because they trust cultural methods of treatment over Western medicine. In other places, such as urban centers with greater mental health awareness, there's a sense of acceptance, yet many people still internalize the stigma, fearing that acknowledging their mental health struggles might impact their social standing or relationships. The human element in all this is the burden of silence and shame that stigma brings. Many people feel unable to seek help because of a fear of judgment or the perception that they should be able to snap out of it on their own. Stigma can be isolating, making people believe their experiences are abnormal, which often worsens their symptoms. Across history and cultures, the struggle against stigma has been as challenging as the symptoms of mental illness itself, adding an extra layer of suffering. The move toward understanding and accepting mental health as a part of overall well-being is still underway, and while progress has been made, the journey is far from over. Early childhood experiences lay down a foundation for personality that often echoes throughout a person's life. The environment a child grows up in, along with the quality of their relationships with caregivers, siblings, and peers, can shape the core of how they view themselves, others, and the world. Imagine a child who grows up with consistent love and care, with parents or guardians who respond attentively to their needs. This child learns to see the world as a safe place, where people are trustworthy and reliable, and where they are valued. They may grow up with a sense of confidence and resilience, able to form healthy relationships because they have an internalized sense of security. These early positive interactions set the stage for a personality marked by openness and stability, and a fundamental belief in their own worth. In contrast, a child who experiences neglect or unpredictable caregiving may develop in a very different way. If their caregivers are emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or even critical, they might start to believe that they're unworthy of love or that the world is inherently unsafe. This can lead to a sense of insecurity, where the child grows up always on edge, questioning their self-worth, and perhaps feeling anxious in relationships. They might carry a wariness or hesitation that impacts their ability to connect with others deeply, always bracing for rejection or criticism. As they mature, these early patterns often become part of their personality, shaping them into adults who struggle with trust or who approach relationships with caution, sometimes out of a learned belief that affection or support is fleeting or conditional. Early experiences also influence how a person learns to regulate their emotions. A child who has caregivers who are attuned to their emotional needs learns that their feelings are valid and manageable. If they're upset, they learn that they can turn to someone for comfort, which helps them develop a balanced approach to handling difficult emotions. Over time, this becomes part of their personality. They may grow up to be someone who is emotionally stable, empathetic, and able to navigate challenges without becoming overwhelmed. But for children whose emotional needs are ignored or invalidated, the impact can be lasting. They might learn to suppress or ignore their feelings, leading to a personality that's outwardly stoic but inwardly conflicted. Or they might become overly reactive, struggling to manage emotions because they never had a safe space to learn how. Even seemingly small experiences, like how a parent reacts to a child's first failures or successes, can shape personality traits such as resilience, self-esteem, and curiosity. A child encouraged to explore and make mistakes is more likely to grow into an adult who approaches life with curiosity and a willingness to take risks. Conversely, a child who faces harsh criticism or pressure to succeed may become overly cautious or self-critical, fearing that their worth depends on perfection. These early messages sink deeply into the developing personality, molding the ways in which they tackle challenges, form connections, and see themselves. Human beings carry traces of their childhood experiences, whether they're aware of it or not. Sometimes, as adults, people can look back and understand that certain traits, like a need for control, a tendency to avoid conflict, or a difficulty with intimacy, have roots in their early years. For others, these influences are more subtle, woven so closely into their sense of self that it feels like they were always that way. The experiences of childhood don't define a person completely, but they set a tone for the development of personality, influencing habits, thought patterns, and emotional responses that can last a lifetime. The potential for artificial intelligence in diagnosing mental disorders offers an exciting and transformative possibility for mental health care. Mental health diagnosis is complex and deeply personal, often requiring careful evaluation of subtle patterns in behavior, speech, and even biological factors. Traditionally, mental health professionals have had to rely on self-reported symptoms, interviews, and observation, a process that, while valuable, can be subjective and sometimes limited by the individual's ability or willingness to articulate their experiences. AI, however, brings a new level of objectivity and pattern recognition that could supplement traditional methods, allowing for quicker, more accurate assessments that might have been missed in human-only diagnoses. AI can analyze vast amounts of data from various sources: medical histories, genetic markers, speech patterns, social media activity, and even facial expressions, to detect patterns linked to mental disorders. For example, certain speech patterns might subtly shift in people experiencing depression or early symptoms of psychosis, changes that could be too subtle for even an expert to identify consistently. AI, trained on massive data sets of language and speech, can pick up on these nuances, alerting clinicians to potential red flags that might otherwise go unnoticed. In cases of disorders with complex presentations, such as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, AI could help in differentiating symptoms that are often misdiagnosed, ensuring patients receive more accurate diagnoses and appropriate treatment sooner. The use of AI also offers a way to monitor mental health over time, tracking changes that may signal a need for intervention. This is especially valuable for conditions like depression or anxiety, where symptoms can vary greatly from day to day. For someone struggling with ongoing mental health challenges, AI systems integrated into devices like smartphones or wearable technology could continuously monitor markers of mental well-being, such as changes in sleep patterns, social interactions, or physical activity levels. These technologies can then alert the individual or their healthcare provider if there are significant changes, potentially allowing for early intervention before symptoms become severe. This proactive approach could revolutionize mental health care, making it more preventive and less reactive. But perhaps one of the most profound benefits of AI in mental health diagnosis is accessibility. For many people, accessing mental health care remains a challenge due to stigma, financial constraints, or a lack of nearby services. AI-powered tools could provide initial screening and guidance to people who might otherwise go without support, acting as a bridge to human care when needed. In rural areas, underserved communities, or places with a shortage of mental health professionals, AI could help identify people in need, prioritizing resources for those most at risk. Still, the use of AI in diagnosing mental disorders isn't without its challenges. Mental health is deeply individual, and AI, while highly effective at pattern recognition, lacks an understanding of the human context. Every person's mental health journey is unique, shaped by factors like culture, life experiences, and personal values, which aren't always easily captured by data alone. Misdiagnosis or over-reliance on AI insights could lead to treatments that don't consider the full scope of an individual's needs. Additionally, there are ethical concerns around privacy and consent. Mental health data is deeply personal, and the use of AI in this field requires robust measures to ensure that individuals' information is kept secure and used responsibly. The future of AI in diagnosing mental disorders lies in its potential to work alongside human clinicians, not replace them. A well-trained AI system could act as an invaluable tool, providing insights that support the clinician's work, offering recommendations, or flagging cases that require immediate attention. By combining the precision of AI with the empathy and intuition of human clinicians, mental health diagnosis and care could become more responsive, accurate, and inclusive, offering hope for earlier intervention and better outcomes for those in need. Brain plasticity, or neuroplasticity, is one of the mind's most powerful traits, offering a pathway for recovery and growth, even in the face of mental disorders. It describes the brain's capacity to adapt, reorganize, and, to some extent, heal itself in response to new experiences, environments, or challenges. For someone dealing with a mental disorder, this ability can mean hope. Disorders like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and even schizophrenia once suggested a kind of permanence, an assumption that the brain was simply wired one way. But discoveries in neuroplasticity suggest the brain can actually reshape itself, responding to interventions, therapy, and even small, everyday experiences. The brain, in essence, has an incredible way of responding to repeated activities or thought patterns. For example, consider how someone recovering from depression might find it hard to feel joy or even see a positive outlook on life. Over time, the brain becomes wired toward patterns that are focused on sadness or lack of motivation. But with therapies, like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and even physical exercise, the brain can be gently guided to form new pathways. Through consistent effort, it begins to respond differently to triggers, establishing new connections that support healthier perspectives and emotions. Each small act of confronting a negative thought and trying to reshape it is, in effect, a small rewiring project. The brain builds new synapses, and over time, these efforts form a stronger framework for well-being. While it may be imperceptible day to day, over weeks and months, those who have struggled deeply often report feeling, thinking, and experiencing life in a different way. In some disorders, particularly those marked by trauma, neuroplasticity can help the brain relearn safety and trust. For a person who has endured trauma, the brain can become conditioned to expect danger even in safe environments. Neuroplasticity enables it to learn, over time, and often with the help of a therapist, that safety is possible again. This learning might involve challenging steps, like confronting memories or situations that trigger the past, because, with repeated exposure in a safe, controlled way, the brain is reprogramming its fear response. What was once an automatic reaction of fear can become one of calm, or at least a neutral acknowledgement that past fears don't have to define the present. Even severe disorders like schizophrenia show the impact of neuroplasticity. For instance, with treatments like cognitive remediation therapy, individuals can improve cognitive functions that are often impaired, such as memory and attention. While they may still live with the disorder's effects, the brain's adaptability allows for improvements that support more independent, fulfilling lives. Small achievements, like being able to engage in a conversation or remembering daily tasks, build a more resilient foundation in the brain, offering confidence and a sense of agency that might have felt unreachable before. Recovery through neuroplasticity is also a reminder of the brain's patience. People often feel pressured to get better quickly, yet the brain works in its own time, rewarding each small, repetitive effort. Even setbacks have meaning in this process. Setbacks themselves can be a part of the brain's recalibration, indicating areas that need further reinforcement or adjustment. For those on the journey, understanding that their minds are constantly working, reshaping, and responding can provide a source of motivation and self-compassion. Ultimately, neuroplasticity is the science behind resilience, but it's also deeply personal. It's woven into the story of each person who has faced mental illness and managed to build something new. With time and effort, the brain does what it's naturally inclined to do: find new ways to help its owner survive, adapt, and eventually thrive. The history of mental health treatment is one laced with misunderstanding, fear, and, at times, cruelty. For centuries, mental illness was cloaked in mystery, often seen as a moral or spiritual failing rather than a medical condition. People suffering from what we now recognize as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and other disorders were misunderstood at best and feared at worst. Communities and families, unable to understand these conditions, often turned to brutal treatments to try to correct or cure what they didn't understand. Early treatments were harsh, sometimes outright dangerous, driven by desperation or misguided beliefs rather than scientific understanding. During the Middle Ages, those suffering from mental illness were often believed to be possessed by evil spirits. Exorcisms, rituals, and in some cases, public humiliations were employed in an attempt to purify them. Religious leaders, thought to have the power to rid people of these supposed demons, often conducted grueling rites that placed immense physical and emotional strain on the afflicted. If these methods didn't work, or if the behavior was too erratic or violent, people with mental illnesses could be cast out of their homes, even their villages, left to survive alone in a world that viewed them as dangerous or cursed. Many people died from neglect, starvation, or exposure, abandoned simply for having an illness no one could explain. The emergence of asylums in the 18th and 19th centuries, though intended as sanctuaries, often brought more suffering. These facilities were places to lock people away from society, out of sight and mind. Inside their walls, conditions were abysmal. Patients lived in crowded rooms, often without basic hygiene or comfort, and they were subjected to a range of treatments that were more about control than cure. Restraints like straitjackets and isolation cells were common, along with methods that were euphemistically called therapies, but were more akin to punishment. Physical punishments and other painful treatments were routinely used to discipline or subdue patients. Those who spent years in these places often left with more psychological scars than they entered with, having endured an existence of neglect, abuse, and dehumanization. The early 20th century saw the introduction of shock therapies and surgeries that were touted as breakthroughs but were, in reality, often dangerous and distressing. Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, developed in the 1930s, involved sending electric currents through the brain to induce seizures. Though later adapted into safer forms, early ECT was administered without anesthesia or muscle relaxants, leaving patients with fractured memories, severe pain, and sometimes lasting trauma. Worse still were lobotomies, procedures where parts of the brain's frontal lobe were removed or destroyed to calm patients. The effects were severe and often tragic. People were left incapacitated, unable to function independently, stripped of their personalities and vitality. These operations were often performed without proper understanding or consent, leaving countless individuals unable to recognize their own identities. With the rise of psychopharmacology in the mid-20th century, treatments began to shift from invasive procedures to chemical management. Antipsychotic and mood-stabilizing drugs, hailed as breakthroughs, initially offered some relief but also came with severe side effects, like tremors, weight gain, and loss of cognitive clarity. Many patients on these early drugs suffered immensely, both from the side effects and from the stigma attached to their disorders. Medications sometimes acted more like tranquilizers, subduing rather than helping people heal or improve their quality of life. But with mental illness still so poorly understood, these drugs became crutches in a system desperate for any form of control. Looking back, the history of mental health treatment reflects society's broader struggles to understand and accept mental illness. The painful legacy left by these early practices has left a deep impact, both on individuals and on how we approach mental health today. For those who lived through it, the scars were not just physical or psychological but societal, as they were often labeled crazy or hopeless by a world that had neither the knowledge nor compassion to truly help them. In their suffering, they became silent reminders of how misunderstanding can lead to cruelty, and their stories have spurred a slow but essential change in the way we view and treat mental illness. Each step forward, each treatment that prioritizes care, dignity, and understanding, is a step toward honoring those who endured this dark history and suffered under its weight. The connection between creativity and certain mental disorders is both fascinating and complex, offering insights into how the mind works in extraordinary ways. For centuries, society has romanticized the idea of the tortured artist, someone whose profound creativity is often paired with deep emotional struggles. Studies have revealed that conditions like bipolar disorder, depression, and even schizophrenia can, in some cases, enhance certain cognitive patterns or perspectives that fuel creative expression. This connection isn't universal or definitive. Not everyone with a mental disorder is creatively inclined, and not all creative individuals face mental health challenges. But for those who do, creativity can serve both as a lifeline and as a reflection of the unique ways their minds interpret the world. People with bipolar disorder often describe the manic phase as a period of incredible energy, vivid thoughts, and a flood of ideas that seem to come from nowhere. During these times, they may feel a kind of clarity or inspiration that pushes them to create, often at a relentless pace. For some, it can feel exhilarating, almost like a superpower, with ideas and emotions converging in ways that produce original, intense, or boundary-pushing art. Yet, this creative surge is often followed by periods of depression, where even picking up a paintbrush or writing a line of poetry feels impossible. In these darker times, creative expression can become a struggle, but it can also serve as a way to process the inner pain and turmoil they experience. The cycle of highs and lows adds a dynamic intensity to their work, capturing the rawness of human emotion in a way that resonates with others. Schizophrenia, though a severe disorder, also shows unique connections to creative thinking, particularly in terms of unusual associations and perceptions. The condition often involves altered ways of thinking, with individuals experiencing hallucinations, delusions, or shifts in perception that can open up unusual creative perspectives. For some, these perceptions manifest as a blend of reality and imagination, resulting in artworks or ideas that challenge conventional boundaries. Visual artists, writers, or musicians who experience schizophrenia sometimes create pieces that reflect their inner landscapes, translating abstract or fragmented thoughts into expressions that, paradoxically, can communicate deeply relatable themes. They see patterns, hear sounds, or envision scenes that others might overlook or dismiss, crafting works that invite audiences into a different experience of reality. While the disorder itself is incredibly challenging and can be debilitating, the experiences it brings to some allow for expressions of creativity that are bold, intricate, and layered. Depression, while more often thought of as stifling and isolating, has also been linked to creativity in profound ways. The depth of emotional pain and introspection that accompanies depression can lead people to explore questions of meaning, identity, and existence. Questions that art, literature, and music often try to address. In processing their suffering, individuals may find ways to convey their experiences with raw honesty, expressing feelings that many struggle to articulate. Writing a poem, painting a canvas, or composing a song can become an outlet, a way to give voice to pain without having to directly confront it. This kind of work resonates deeply with others, capturing truths about sadness, hope, and resilience in ways that feel universal. For many artists, depression is not so much a source of inspiration as it is a lens through which they experience the world, shaping their art in ways that reflect the quiet and often overlooked aspects of human experience. At the same time, living with a mental disorder while pursuing a creative life is challenging. Creativity can be both a blessing and a curse for those facing mental health struggles. The demands of creative work can sometimes deepen feelings of isolation or exacerbate emotional instability, particularly if the work is deeply personal or emotionally taxing. While creativity offers an outlet, it does not provide immunity from the hardships of mental illness. In many cases, individuals rely on a combination of creative expression, therapy, support systems, and sometimes medication to find a balance. This connection between creativity and mental illness remains a reminder of the richness and diversity of human experience, where struggle and beauty often intertwine. For those whose creative gifts and challenges coexist, art becomes a kind of language, one that reaches others in ways words alone cannot. It's a journey marked by both vulnerability and resilience, where the act of creating is a testament to the complexity of the mind and the power of expression as a form of survival. Through their work, these individuals invite others to see the world as they see it, and in doing so, they not only reveal their own stories but also illuminate the depths of what it means to be human. The idea that emotions are stored in the body may sound almost mystical, but it has grounding in both science and human experience. Emotions are not just fleeting thoughts or intangible feelings. They are deeply embodied, woven into the very tissues, muscles, and nerves that make up our physical selves. When we experience a strong emotion, like fear, anger, or sadness, it isn't just a mental event. Our bodies respond in precise, physiological ways. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline surge. Our muscles tense, our hearts race, and our breathing changes. These reactions are not arbitrary. They are ways the body mobilizes energy, often in preparation to act on that emotion. When these emotions are intense or go unresolved, these physical reactions can linger, creating emotional memories that reside in the body. Imagine, for instance, how someone feels after a traumatic experience. Even long after the danger has passed, their body might still react as if it were in the midst of it. Muscles tighten, as if bracing for impact, the chest constricts, making deep breaths feel impossible, and small triggers can provoke an intense, physical reaction. Trauma lives in the body in ways that are often involuntary and deeply embedded. This is why people may experience sudden panic, a racing heart, or muscle tension without consciously understanding why. The body holds onto these sensations, protecting itself by staying on alert, even if that alertness is no longer necessary. Each emotion seems to have its own pattern of storage. Anxiety, for instance, often gathers in the shoulders and neck, leading to tension headaches or chronic pain. Grief and sadness may manifest in the chest, causing a sensation of heaviness or even a tight, aching feeling that many describe as a literal pain in the heart. Anger can settle in the jaw, causing people to clench their teeth, or in the hands, creating an urge to tense or grasp. This isn't simply symbolic. It's the body preparing itself to react in ways that align with the emotion, even if that reaction never actually happens. When emotions are regularly ignored, suppressed, or left unresolved, the body's natural reactions can become almost ingrained, leading to chronic issues. Chronic stress or prolonged anxiety can keep the body in a near-constant state of fight or flight, impacting the nervous system, digestive system, and immune system. People with long-standing emotional burdens may notice that their bodies feel tired, tense, or even sick, as if they've been carrying a physical weight. This is why emotional health can be so closely tied to physical health. Unresolved emotional patterns can impact blood pressure, sleep, digestion, and even how the body heals. Body-centered therapies, like somatic experiencing, yoga, or certain forms of massage, work with the body to help release stored emotions. The goal is to create a safe space where the body can finally let go of tension, releasing old emotional patterns that no longer serve it. For someone who's held onto grief, a simple exercise in breathwork or mindful movement can unlock surprising feelings, sometimes bringing them to the surface in ways that feel both liberating and unsettling. These approaches recognize that emotions aren't just mental phenomena but physical experiences, lodged in the muscles, organs, and nervous system. The process of release can be slow and requires sensitivity, as the body tends to release in layers, each one revealing a bit more about the underlying emotions that have shaped someone's life experience. In a way, our bodies tell the stories we sometimes can't articulate. Over time, the physical postures, chronic pains, and lingering sensations become a map of our emotional journeys. This interconnection between body and emotion means that healing is never purely a mental endeavor. It's a holistic one, involving both the mind and the physical self. Recognizing and working through these emotions, stored in the body's fabric, can be a pathway to both emotional and physical freedom, allowing a person to truly feel grounded and whole in their own skin. In that sense, the body holds our experiences not just as memories, but as active parts of who we are, shaping how we move, breathe, and live. The fear of treatment or recovery is a complex, deeply personal experience for many people, even when they want to feel better. For some, the idea of treatment can feel like stepping into unknown territory, a place where vulnerabilities will be exposed and comfort zones might be shaken. In many cases, individuals have lived with their struggles for so long that the pain or discomfort has become a part of their identity. The thought of breaking down this familiar structure, even if it's painful, can feel disorienting. People often wonder who they'll be without these patterns, whether they'll even recognize themselves, or if they'll be able to cope with the emotions and challenges that come with healing. Treatment can also mean facing parts of themselves they may have been avoiding. Mental health issues or unresolved traumas often come with memories, feelings, or thoughts that are painful to revisit. Therapy, medication, or other forms of treatment may require them to confront these experiences, bringing buried emotions to the surface. This process can be frightening. Exposing old wounds, addressing long-held beliefs, and examining the impact of past experiences can feel overwhelming. Even with support, the thought of opening up such vulnerable places can provoke a natural resistance, a fear of being consumed or destabilized by emotions that have been tightly contained. For others, there's a fear of failure, the idea that trying to heal might not work. When someone has attempted recovery before and faced setbacks or disappointment, it can be hard to find the courage to try again. This fear is often linked to the shame or guilt of feeling like they should be able to get better, as if recovery were a straightforward path rather than the winding, sometimes unpredictable journey that it really is. The pressure to succeed at recovery can feel overwhelming, and the possibility of not achieving it brings its own pain, one that many feel is safer to avoid entirely. They may ask themselves if the potential disappointment of failing once again is worth the risk. Social dynamics can also play a role. Some people fear that treatment will change their relationships, making them feel isolated from friends or family who may not understand or support their journey. There's often a worry that loved ones will react differently to them if they begin to change, or that those who've known them through their struggles won't know how to relate to the new person they might become. These fears can create inner conflict, where the desire to grow and heal is countered by the fear of losing connection or support. When the people closest to them are skeptical or judgmental of treatment, the choice to pursue help can feel like a betrayal or abandonment of their familiar world, a step away from relationships they value deeply. Then there's the fear of the unknown. Treatment often comes with uncertainty, not just about the future, but about the self. Who will they be if they're no longer weighed down by their pain or conditioned responses? Some fear they might lose their creativity, their edge, or even their sense of self. For someone who's long identified with their struggles, there can be a worry that life will lose its intensity or meaning if they let go of their suffering. This fear can keep people rooted in place, where, despite the pain, at least they know who they are. And while these fears may not be rational, they are very real, grounded in a deep-seated need for identity, control, and a sense of familiarity. Lastly, there's sometimes a feeling that they don't deserve to get better. For those who carry shame, guilt, or low self-worth, the idea of healing can feel out of reach. They may think they haven't earned recovery or that others are more deserving of happiness and well-being. This self-judgment can be a heavy weight, one that makes the very notion of treatment feel like an undeserved luxury. Even if they want to get better, this internalized belief can create a barrier that feels insurmountable, a quiet voice that tells them recovery is not for them. Each of these fears is deeply human, reflecting the intricate ways our minds and hearts work to protect us from pain, even if that means holding on to it. For some, these fears lessen with time, patience, and support, gradually allowing them to see recovery not as a loss but as a reclamation of self. The journey toward healing is rarely easy, but understanding these fears can help people approach treatment with compassion, knowing that the fear itself is part of what makes recovery such a powerful act of courage. Thank you for journeying with us through the mind's most puzzling mysteries. From the subtle lines between normal and abnormal to the powerful impact of trauma and memory, we've scratched the surface of what makes abnormal psychology endlessly intriguing. Our brains are strange, resilient, and sometimes defiant, and exploring them always leaves us with more questions than answers. If you enjoyed wandering these quiet corridors of the mind, don't forget to like this video. And, of course, subscribe to Quiet Universe if you're ready to dive even deeper into the unknown, where we'll keep uncovering the secrets of the universe, both outer and inner. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning.